everybody, and thank you for coming back for another week of Blumira Briefings. We are back from RSA and hopping back into the flow of things and have a full lineup of stories for this week. So I will start by introducing our panel. I love that it sounds like a old Nickelodeon show. We've got Mike, Michael, and Jake joining us today. So we'll just go around the horn. Everybody want to go ahead and quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jake. I'm with the detection engineering team here at Blumira.
Awesome.
Mike Toole. I'm Director Security and IT for Blumira here.
And Michael Keller. I'm VP of Product here at Blumira.
Awesome. So we're going to start, as usual, by taking a look at what we've been seeing on the Blumira platform over the last week. Looking at the top threats of the week, again, making appearance, indicator of a Sophos blocked website, a SentinelOne unmitigated suspicious threat, which we're actually going to have a conversation sort of related to that later, and then a failed single-factor PowerShell authentication attempt. And Jake, you made some observations about out of our top 10 threats this week that you noticed.
Yeah, for the threats, and I think we might have missed this because we didn't report last week. So there was one that kind of piqued my interest, which was the Microsoft 365 malware campaign detected in SharePoint and OneDrive. That's what's known internally. We kind of refer to these as like replay detection. So this is something that Microsoft would have detected with either Defender or one of their own alerts there, and then we just basically take that, replay that, so it's in the Blumira platform as well. So it's kind of like a single pane of glass. You don't need to be going one place or another place. You can just kind of rely on Blumira to grab all of that stuff. And I just thought this one was interesting because it was the first time I think we've seen it on this report. And I think typically that particular alert is in regards to basically Microsoft finding or at least seeing like some kind of malicious file in SharePoint or OneDrive. So I suspect with what we're seeing there, it's probably something that was just like a single orgs detection going off, and just happened to be, since it's SharePoint or OneDrive, it might be shared to other people's drives. But I mean, I didn't really dig into it that much, but I just thought it was something interesting that Microsoft does report on that kind of stuff, and we will also let you know when that's going on. And then the other thing that kind of piqued my interest about this, and this is probably true every week, but just how many of these alerts are Azure or 365 related. We're looking at the top 10, and 5 of them are all either Azure or 365. So it just goes to show you how kind of important it is to keep an eye on those things, and how prominent we get detections on that, how consistently we do.
Yeah. Unsurprising. I think, between the number of folks that are going to have Azure resources, Defender security notifications, and then just the frequency of email being targeted, and probably being one of the most widely adopted solutions across the folks that we're helping. But still, half of the list is pretty notable. Going to our suspects, batch script execution showing up again, although slightly down over the last week. Remote access by Splashtop, an possible travel login from M365, and then a potential clear text password on a local system by a process. Any thoughts on these?
Uh, yeah, I had another kind of something that piqued my interest on these as well. Coming in at number 6 with the reconnaissance via net commands. And this is just a detection I generally love. It can be a little like maybe love hate because you can sometimes get a lot of false positives with this. We tried to tune this one so it's not just picking up regular administrator activity. But it still can be picked up. Like some of the RMM tools, some of the automated scripts that people have going out will trigger this one. But at the same time, net commands are almost used in like every instant that I look at, because typically attackers, once they land somewhere, they need to figure out what's going on in the environment, where they landed, who they landed, like what permissions they have. So it's a very good sign of something going on in your network. and something you should just investigate every time. And then even if it is something that you have an automated script, you can always make filters to try and tune that out. But the reconnaissance via net commands is one that's a very simple detection, but can be very powerful with detecting true incidents early on in their life cycle.
Absolutely. And then on our risks, still top of the list, but down about 12% from last week is authentication outside the US for Microsoft 365, Google Workspace potential clear text password, a public IP SMB connection. We've talked about these at length. And then 100 or more file deletions inside of 15 minutes on SharePoint. Again, on those, risks, those are not necessarily indicators of a threat, but they are potential issues that could affect your operational resilience or be exploited later on if not addressed. So, anything to add on those, gents?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd add and lower down the list is also Telnet on here. And so seeing SMB, seeing Telnet, kind of I feel like the classics of not always best practices. And so where people can get caught up, or really more importantly, where someone might look like an attractive target to a threat actor. And so things just always that jump out to me, thinking about how do people harden, how do people kind of make themselves look a little bit less appetizing, especially when you're a small business. Things like what ports you have and what do you have on those ports becomes really, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and additionally, I think this one came in at number 6 as well, as the Microsoft 365 group modified. That one seems pretty like chill, I guess, when it comes to like alerts that you could be getting in Blumira. But it is one that I think is important because at first glance you may not think that it's that important or that's something that you really should get on. Groups are modified all the time. But it is something that threat actors do use if they're trying to either move laterally or even escalate their privileges. They'll use things to they'll basically enumerate your environment and just figure out what groups they need to become part of to get administrative access or expanded access to your environment. And specifically, they use tools like Graph Spy, Graph Runner, Azure Hound, and Road tools. Specifically, Road Recon is one that's used for basically just enumerating those groups, understanding what groups can get you further access into the environment, and then all you need to do is figure out, okay, how can I get into that group? They figure out whatever way they need to, and then they get into that group, and then you'll get that group modified detection firing off. So it's just another one that's kind of like might not always point to bad behavior, but it could be an early indicator of an attacker doing something they shouldn't be.
So, hopping into our security updates. So, these are the stories from the week that, at least in my review, I think are more likely to affect folks that are watching or listening, and that we want to make sure to get the word out about, because in most cases, these are things that do have fixes or updates available. And so, we just want to make sure that if something that you might be exposed to, that you're taking some mitigation measures. There's several of those stories this week. The first one being a suite of AirPlay flaws that's collectively being referred to as AirBorne, and can affect AirPlay-enabled devices, not just iOS and Mac devices, but also AirPlay-enabled media players affected on the same Wi-Fi network. There's a couple of associated CVEs here. We will include details on those in the notes. The first is a use after free vulnerability that can be used to manipulate an arbitrary free action, enabling an attacker to execute code remotely. When it's chained with the other CVE for user interaction bypass, it allows for a zero-click RCE on macOS devices connected to the same network. Apple responded by saying that these bugs can only be exploited if default settings have been changed. I think as part of a way to try and reduce the scope or concern on the issue. And then the labs, Oglio, that published this research said that vulnerable devices with mics could be used as listening devices, but hadn't yet provided a POC of that. There are patches available. This is something that folks are concerned about because many of those smart devices either will have limited patches made available, or in many cases, folks may not actually go back to update those devices later. So, chatting about this, how should we contextualize this in terms of real world risk? When Apple says that this requires non-default settings, does that mean that organizations should value this less as a risk, or deprioritize it? What are folks' thoughts?
This one's going to be around for a while.
Agreed.
There's this one's tough. It's multifaceted. So it's AirPlay enabled devices, and if you think through that, right now you're talking about, I don't know, all your smart speakers, CarPlay, like physical CarPlay in your actual car, right? Any kind of casting device like Roku's, those types. And then obviously like Mac OS and iOS devices. And the patch is, like update the device to the latest OS, and there's a patch that fixes it. But no one's doing that for, their home Roku. No one's going to do that on their car, or at least like not very fast. The automakers are probably going to be still rolling patches out, I'm sure now, right? Like that's, so this one's going to be around for a while. The trick is your device, like the origin device, will probably be vulnerable for a while, but then like your laptop or your iPhone can be patched. So like that's the first thing to do, is like patch everybody's stuff. It's the most complete way to protect against this. I've seen a lot of people, theorizing through like, oh, well, I just turn AirPlay off on our network, and it's like, sort of, that kind of works, but not really. Like, and also the command to do that, to force it, if you're running like managed MDM, it like kind of works. I've seen mixed results there. The fun part about this bug is it's actually a flaw in the plist parser inside of Mac OS, which, if you're not familiar with what a plist is, it's basically just a different version of XML. And if you're old like me, you remember that XML parsing flaws happen all the time. So it makes me nervous that there will be more bugs like this, because there haven't been very many in the past. So this one's definitely notable on the Apple side of the house.
Well, and it's interesting because I know that for years we've talked about shadow IT and the problems there, and getting past the if it's more complicated than somebody answering a credit card, you're at risk of somebody going around the process. And I haven't seen as much discussion of like inherited or adopted IT, especially with so many more folks working remotely. I apologize if you can hear my dog. Um, for vulnerabilities like this that require just being on the same network, you can apply MDM to people's work devices, but not necessarily to their Xbox or to their HomePod speaker, right? So yeah, this is definitely something that's going to be a concern for a while. And let's make sure we chat about what all you can do. So patches installed, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I tried not to laugh too much, Mike, when you said MDM fix kind of works, because that's literally like the same notes I had in my past life. My last job is like, that was generally like my impression on all of the MDM. It's like most of it kind of worked. Sometimes it doesn't. You can't really totally rely on it. But I did find in this article there was one thing that I wanted to just pull out and highlight, because they did highlight a potential scenario, which I think grounds this a little bit for a lot of people out there wondering like how they could be affected. And it was stated that you need to be on the same Wi-Fi network as your attacker. So attacker and victim would need to be on the same Wi-Fi, which is also not difficult to arrange in public Wi-Fi scenarios. But they said a victim device is compromised, or this is the scenario, is a victim device is compromised while using public Wi-Fi, and then they connect to their employee's network, providing a path for the attacker to take over additional devices on that network. And as far as like organizations like like sighing relief when they see like, oh, it's a non-default setting, whatever. The one thing I wanted to point out is like I don't think you should automatically reduce the concern right off the bat. In best case scenario, like an organization should have some kind of risk assessment procedure or process to understand like what's the likelihood of exploitation for my users of this, and what could attackers get access to if they do get onto one of these phones. And are there any other restrictions that we have in place, or like conditional access or anything else that could stop an attack like this? So it's like kind of like all those things added together that kind of makes you like figure out if what kind of risk it poses for your company, and that non-default setting is just one part of that equation.
Yep. Yeah. Another thing too, like if you are running office networks, definitely go check your if you're using like Apple TVs for kiosks, right? Like any kind of dashboard. Most of the like dashboarding hardware that you connect to a TV has that AirPlay enabled.
Moving on to our next story, there's a story about two SonicWall vulnerabilities being exploited, neither of which notably are new. The first has a CVSS of 7.2 and it allows OS command injection, does require admin privileges, and this was first announced and had a patch released in December of 2023. The second having a CVSS of 9.8 and being a path traversal flaw in their HTTP server, Apache server. And it allows mapping URLs to a file path location on that server, to files that already have a servable permission, and that can be used for session hijacking. That one has had a patch released in December. Both of these advisories were updated this week as they've been observed being exploited in the wild. SonicWall is again urging patching. And this affects the SMA 200, 210, 400, 410, and 500 series. And then there's a second story here, just that a POC has been published on those two CVEs in conjunction. So I guess to start from, why does SonicWall have to sort of re-announce or re-advise people to update for a advisory that they issued now a year and a half ago?
Feels like the classic answer is patching is hard. Like
Yeah.
it sounds really easy, and I think if you're a modern org running a small stack, it definitely is. But I feel like the classic I always think about is you're a bigger company, or your company is acquiring other companies. That's how you end up with a really sprawling network where the person who is responsible for patching and maintenance is no longer there, or now they're responsible for three different networks that they aren't necessarily going to know everything on all these systems, and so you just fall behind. It's really hard to like look at this stuff and know by default. And there's a lot of different systems that run vulnerability management, but especially when you're looking at like a low CVSS score, most systems are not going to highlight a 7.2. They're going to be like, oh, it's 7.2. Let's move on. And that makes it really, really hard to prioritize for any sort of smaller business. So not surprised that SonicWall is calling it back out as it's being exploited at all.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where the situation has kind of changed enough where they wanted to provide an update. And I'm glad they at least did something and said something. They could have just said, nope, this has already been, we're already aware of this, reference this article. At least they updated the article and added even like a change log to that article and said like, hey, we're seeing in the wild attacks of this. There's an extra little thing that we didn't account for. And like as much as we'd like them to catch everything on the first try, it's just tough. Like keeping these devices protected and even having like the actual resources at your company to like catch everything can be really hard. And cyber is always a community effort, so it's like it's good to see that like one org or one research org can say one thing and then it gets fed to the right people, and then they just let you know that hey, it's back again, basically.
Looking at our next story, there's a announcement of a bring your own installer EDR bypass that has been used in ransomware attacks. This is a bypass that's being exploited to evade SentinelOne's tamper protection feature. Research was shared by John Ailes and Tim Mashney of Aon's Strong Friedberg Incident Response. Hopefully, I got all of those pronunciations right. And it's actually a pretty simple method. It doesn't rely on any third-party tools or drivers. Instead, it's exploiting the sort of natural process of processes that are terminated during an upgrade installer being run. So what the attackers have been doing is during that brief interruption where the process is closed to start the update, they are launching another legit S1 installer and then terminating that process. That's been effective across the current versions. SentinelOne has advised mitigation by enabling online authorization setting, which is off by default. And Strauss Friedberg shared logs that showed the method had been exploited in in a ransomware attack on one of their customers. And also, SentinelOne had privately shared information about this with their customers in January after they were notified by the researchers, and has announced that they shared this with other EDR vendors in case they were also affected. Palo Alto helpfully confirmed that their installer was not susceptible to that attack. I think a good place to start on this one, if there's a effective mitigation measure like online authorization, why would that be disabled by default? What would the trade-off potentially be?
The notes I wrote down for this is kind of like, and I actually am questioning myself a little bit here, but it's kind of like a fear of inconvenience for the users, and a possible like friction point for administrators. It's that one of those things that's like the balance between keeping things secure and keeping things easy to use. I think that's one of those balances that across the industry we're all trying to strike. And that's one of those ones where they just decided to take just the easier to use side of things as like the default.
Yeah, yeah, that's tough too because it's like, you might have offline devices, right? Or like devices that are not online on a regular basis, right? So it's like they may be jumping in, grabbing, like grabbing new lists of things, right? Like checking in periodically, batch process, right? But like authorization is pretty tough where it's like, okay, I don't know, get that device online so you can authorize your DPDR. Like, who's doing that, right?
That's like all
Always the
those.
balance of best process versus convenient enough that folks still follow it or that it works for how the business needs to run.
Yeah, it's like this is kind of a weird analogy, but it's like if there's any gamers out there, you know how annoying it is to have an always online game that you're just trying to play offline. That's kind of one of those scenarios here.
Solid analogy. Absolutely. I think that a lot of folks will be able to relate to that. Well, we can move on to our general security news. The first story being that Windows RDP, it was reported, lets you log in for a time using revoked passwords, which Microsoft has said is expected behavior. And so details on this, authenticated RDP sessions continue to work even after password changes or the account being disabled. Uh, Alan Gall reported this issue. Microsoft responded saying this is working as designed because RDP is using Kerberos tickets, which aren't immediately invalidated and they remain valid for about 10 hours. Microsoft said that this is to make sure that at least one user account is still able to gain access. This is affecting all Windows versions, including Server 2022 and Windows 11. So this is something I think that folks should be aware of if they are not already. Currently, the viable mitigation is to forcibly terminate the user session on the RDP target machine. Um, should this have an impact on how offboarding procedures for remote workers are handled? How should this factor into strategy for folks that are looking to address this potential risk?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Like, I can definitely see why they did it as a design choice. And I believe when I was looking into this, it was like there are some caveats. It's not just like every session doesn't expire, right? I think it's like you have to have it's like the last user on the system basically. So it's like, okay, I get it, right? Like, I don't want to be locked out of that server at 2 a.m. either, because I forgot to rotate the certs.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I do know that they like had to update their docs to basically say like, oh no, we do actually do this, like everybody, just so you know. So it's like there are some you can read about that online and like see what the actual, mitigations and stuff are. Um, you may actually just be able to have like two users on a device, right? And that'll mitigate it. I'm not fully aware though, yet on that because the docs were very unclear before and they updated them a little bit to basically just like note some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this one's it's not misleading or anything. It's just like Mike was saying, the documentation on this kind of stuff is really weird. I can go off of my own experience or past experience being an MSP administrator, all that kind of stuff. And generally this doesn't like this is scary, but at the same time, I feel like this is how things have been running for a long, long time, as far as RDP and like cached creds go on Windows. So there's like a lot of caveats to this being like you would typically and well, so typically you'd have or you wouldn't have RDP just exposed to the internet. You'd have some kind of authentication method before RDP. If you do have RDP directly exposed, you're probably already breached. So it is what it is. But anyways, you typically would have an authentication method, either that's VPN or some other kind of like work anywhere like feature or something to authenticate that user before they can get into RDP. Um, so I mean, it's not necessary that you disable somebody and then they can just get into a machine. They'd have to authenticate against another thing beforehand, which would then be like, okay, they're disabled and not let them in.
I
Yeah,
think
at the
that's
very
very
least, you have like MFA on that account, and like hopefully, otherwise you have a like go check your RDP. It's probably breached already. Like,
Yeah, just to triple down on that point, I feel like we're all strongly opinionated on this one. If you have RDP publicly exposed on the internet, not behind a firewall, it is the single like greatest indicator of risk to your organization from like a cyber security perspective of any metric I've ever seen. It does not matter what port you put it on. If I can see it from the internet, it's bad. It's really easy to search all the ports nowadays. So all thousands of ports doesn't really help. It used to be if you put it on 3387, it was like, it's almost hidden now. But it doesn't matter if it's on port 10,001. It's just as bad. So just to call it out, please do not make it accessible on the internet.
And one other thing that might help, again, docs are unclear, so some testing we required to confirm this, but possibly disabling cache logons for devices would be something that could help. That's something you can deploy with group policy in Windows. And most security frameworks would even tell you to disable cached creds because not only can they be used for like what we're talking about now, but there are also tools, attacker tools, red team tools that are designed to extract those things from memory or extract those things from the registry. So there's plenty of reasons to, even if that doesn't help this problem, there's plenty of reasons to also just like question if you have cached creds disabled on your devices through GPO.
this is like the spring cleaning of go check your RDP.
Yes. And just a call out that it's one of the, I believe it's shown up on our top risks list as something for folks to pay attention to in previous weeks as well. So this is a point that we will, I'm sure, continue to highlight again, but folks should be aware. Next up, there's a research on a new privilege escalation technique for Google Cloud Platform. This write-up was by Matiga about a privilege escalation technique as a result of misconfiguration. The short version is that user-designated accounts, non-admin accounts, that have a resource tag of being able to apply tags can potentially escalate their privileges by attaching tags using that resource group. And this is notable because most organizations wouldn't necessarily consider a tag user account necessarily as sensitive or as privileged versus like an admin access level account. But this is a misuse of conditional role assignment. So the way that this would happen is if there is a conditional assignment that would grant admin access with a tag applied, if you are not careful and a user is able to apply that tag, they could basically work themselves into being an admin. And it's notable that a fair number of Terraform modules do grant that tag user to service accounts. There is some Sigma detection details that were shared, but basically this would where did it say? Um, Basically said that this would not necessarily immediately allow impersonation of that service account because there are some impersonation prevention settings. But if somebody is able to SSH into that VM and extract a live API token, they could just then use that to make calls. So it's just a little bit of an extra hop, skip, and a jump to get there. Mitigation, treat tag user assignment as privilege access with this in mind. Define your IAM conditions such that somebody can't benefit from a tag that they can assign to themselves. And then consider using a deny policy for risky combos that are on more sensitive resources and restrict what accounts and users can inherit tags. So this is kind of a escalation by combination a technique. What are some other ways that teams might be able to identify these kind of misconfiguration risks?
I think it's really funny that I'm just going to say right off the bat that this kind of ties back a little bit to what we were saying at the very beginning about group modification for Microsoft 365. It's very similar to that, but instead of people getting access to groups, I mean, they're getting access to just groups that give them access to other resources in Google Cloud Platform. So it's one of those things that like you might not inherently just understand right off the bat, like how your environment could be compromised by such a thing. But once you start to get into the mindset of like, if somebody got access to this that shouldn't have, like what can they get past that, or like what can they do with that access? So it's tough to like constantly stay on top of all these things, but just having that mindset, like switching your mindset from just like kind of just trying to look at everything to just kind of like one by one, like, okay, if somebody did this, what would they get access to? And just trying to like go through the path that way as well.
Yeah, definitely like cloud threat modeling is a whole nother thing. And if you've never done it, like there are lots of resources online. But it's exactly that type of thing. Like, whoa, what if someone did get into like let's just say someone's in this VM. What can they do? Right. And then you can walk down the process of all the different things they can touch. I've always thought tags is like the worst name. It's it sounds like label, right? Like lots of people literally just use them to, I don't know, a group of this thing, right? Or they'll name it like prod or dev when they don't realize that you can write policies against all of that stuff and like provision permissions and all of that, right? Then you start getting into Kubernetes and Terraform, as you mentioned, right? Like everything's a tag, like it's logical groups. It's like the worst name for what that actually is.
Yeah, and just because I know people like tools and like to get help when they can get it. There's a tool that I've used before called Prowler. It's an open source tool that helps you do kind of security audits for AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and also Kubernetes. So that might be something, even if you like you still should get in the mindset, like I said before, and kind of like take your time through your own environment. But if you're just looking for like somewhere to get started, Prowler is one of those tools, and I can provide that link as well. So we've got it in the notes.
Yeah, yeah. If you have a cloud that's bigger than a list on one screen, um, definitely what you want is a CSPM, it stands for Cloud Security Posture Management, right? So basically, just it's Prowler is what this is. There's tons of them. It scans your cloud. It tells you, hey, this is misconfigured. this policy looks crazy, right? Like turn this off. You shouldn't be doing this. And then you can, it's basically just like a guide for hardening.
And our last story for this week, we wanted to shed a light on a small story flying under the radar. Not sure if a lot of folks watching will have heard of it, kind of called Signalgate. No, there was a updated. I got Jake with that one. There was a update to this story just over the last week after a close-up photo showing that a administration member was using a Signal clone called Telemessage. Some additional research done, I think initially announced by 404 Media, uh, was looking at a Israeli company that's providing modified versions of Signal and other messaging apps to clients, including the US government. The main difference being that these are optimized or adapted to support message archiving, which of course Signal normally is used as a alternative to. The data actually was a telemessage AWS server was breached by an attacker who has shared some of the data that they found. That data included contents from DMs and modified versions of not just the Signal app, but also WhatsApp, Telegram, and WeChat, along with unencrypted data related to some customers, including Customs and Border Patrol and Coinbase, and personal info, as well as indications of who other telemessage customers were. The breach showed that archive chats were not end-to-end encrypted between the modified telemessage app and the archive destination, which was how the attacker was able to get visibility on this data. So, Mike, you suggested we include this story specifically to talk about kind of this phenomena of, wrapper apps that are just kind of functioning around a better known or more mainline developed application, especially like social media. Why are these a problem? Why should folks be aware or have some uh, planning around them?
Yeah, this one in particular, like, got very hot in the InfoSec world over the last week, and whenever that happens, people go to town. And I believe like they basically like ripped open the Android APK, and that's how they found a hard-coded token to the back end of the service, right? That was storing all the messages. Um, and I think the company's like they took their website down. It's very offline now, right? But it did actually serve like a pretty useful use case, right? Like government agencies have to back up messages by law, right? Like for FOIA requests. So how do you solve that? You can't with Signal. It's a very strong end-to-end encrypted platform, right? Like this is what it's known for. Everybody knows how strong Signal is. People try to hack it all the time. It's got weaknesses, but it's always like tricking someone into clicking a thing. So if you really want to use that platform, you have to wrap an app around it. And that's where it's like you take the security properties of the strong app and then you put terrible security properties on top of it to just do the one thing, right? So it's like you have to think about these platforms, and a lot of times they're typically smaller, right? It might be like a single use case, like they solve a problem for a small subset of people, and these people like there's plenty of apps like this. Think about anytime you use like another app to interface with a third-party service, right? So like social media, backup apps. There's tons of apps like this. And your let's say your work Slack has been vetted for security, right? Like you know how the architecture works, you know how they're hardening everything, right? You've even set up end-to-end encryption if you want. But now you bring in a desktop client that's like some weird third-party thing, and it's storing all the message local on your desktop in a database just because that's how they decided to design it, or it was the fastest way. Um, so the tough part is like vetting these is hard unless you're willing to do the work and reverse engineer things, or just like look at security documents, try to vet the company, or like don't use them unless you absolutely have to, or try to use them in a safe way, right? So
Wild idea.
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, you're basically assuming we're always talking about trying to reduce your attack surface, just like understand what's going on in your environment. You're basically not only assuming the attack surface of Signal, but now you're assuming a whole other attack surface now that's just wrapping Signal. So like not only do you have all this exploits that Signal has, which like Mike said, Signal's usually pretty good, but this is true for any kind of wrapper app or anything. Whatever vulnerabilities they have, now you also have those also encased by another whole set of other possible vulnerabilities too. So
The classic
Great way
rule
to
of like
summarize
third
it.
and fourth party risks. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah. We won't cover it, not to toot our own horn too much, but I will give a shout out if you haven't seen it yet on the Blumira blog this week. Our own Taylor Jacobson did a write-up on a malware strain called Sock Golish, and the research that he's been doing to try and identify some telemetry that can be used to build detections for that. It's really interesting and a good peek at how detection engineering, the work of it, happens. So I would encourage checking that out. Um, Also, I'm curious for feedback in the comments as we get to more and more links that I want to include to the original advisories, to CVEs, to mentioned tools. Would it be helpful for folks if we shared the show notes as something that you could view or download? Let us know. I want to thank our panel for this week for joining us. If you haven't yet, consider subscribing so you can find out about new briefings episodes as they go up every Friday at 1. And until next time, thank you everybody for joining and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.